Hey, I'm Wojciech from Brains and Beers. It's been a while. So this video is gonna be a bit different. There's something new I'm trying out. So today I want to talk about Apple's tracking policies. There's this app tracking transparency model that's been popping up in all the apps over the last year. We got some practical knowledge, how to implement it, what works, what doesn't, and how to handle the review process. And it's something that I wanted to share. So first, let's talk about what actually tracking is. So of course different things means different things for different people. So for Apple in particular, it's when you're linking your users' data to a bigger data set in order to facilitate advertising. That's a very strict definition, like very detailed. So a lot of things that we think of as tracking don't fall under it. So that's important. Well, we'll talk about it a bit later. Okay, the wind here is terrible. You probably didn't hear half of it, so I'm gonna move to a better spot. See you. So now that the third boat is gone, let's try to go back to tracking. So you're probably wondering, how does app tracking transparency and Apple's rules relate to the European Union rules, the GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Law in the US? So they don't. In general, they are completely different things. They have their own definitions, and even if the user gave you permission through the app tracking transparency model, you still have to follow the normal GDPR rules. And from my experience with the apps that I've been working on, Apple's pretty peculiar about the order in which you should be asking those tracking permissions. You should first ask with the Apple pop-up, and then later you can display the GDPR consent request. However, even though they are completely different things, you might get your app rejected if you decide to show the GDPR consent request even when the user declined the Apple tracking model. It's complicated, but the thing is that Apple review process has a lot of problems, and one of them is they don't really have much time to do it. I guess it's only a matter of minutes per app and per build. And also you cannot expect the reviewers to be lawyers and to dig into the details of the different regulations you're trying to adhere to, and they would just want to follow simple patterns. So you ask the user if you can track them, they said no. Why would you ask them again? Like, of course you shouldn't. But let's not dive into the details of the GDPR right now and focus on the Apple tracking policies. So you might ask yourself, like, what's the problem with displaying the model? Like, why can't you just display it and get it over with? Well, I think there are three reasons why you should try to avoid having to do that. One is that the code complexity that comes with it. So once you give the user the permission to refuse tracking, then you have to make sure that you handle two flows in your app: the happy flow of the user who accepted, and the other flow that when the user refused, because you cannot block access to your application, or you cannot limit features based on whether the users agree to tracking or not. Like, your app has to be 100% functional for both groups. The second thing is that, as I mentioned before, Apple prefers you to first ask the permissions using the Apple model, and then gather any other tracking consents you would like to take. And if they say no on the first one, then it's the end of the story. You cannot ask more consents. And the Apple tracking pop-up is scary, and people are used to it. So you know how the GDPR cookie banners on the website we all click accept on? We're used to it, and for most of the people, accept is the default choice. And with Apple tracking model, it's different. It's the other way around. I think there's not that much information there. There's scary text that, like, hey, this app is being a creep that follows you everywhere. And it's just easier to press no and move on, because you know that everything will still work. So a lot depends on what your app is doing and what your user base is. But I've seen numbers from between like 80 to 96% of the users refuse tracking. And the third reason why you should probably avoid the model is because you don't really need it. So by Apple's definition of tracking, it only applies if you're using global identifiers, you link them with third-party data, or share your data set with other companies or other people. And the third, if it's done for the advertising purposes or measuring of the advertisements. And if you're not doing any of those three things, you're fine. So for example, a lot of companies we work with, the only reason they want to track their users is to make their product better, to learn what features are being used, where do their users spend most of the time, to be able to focus on the parts of the applications that the users care about. And you can still do it without, because it does not fall under Apple's tracking rules. You just have to make sure that you choose your third-party partners very carefully, and work with the companies that you know that they will keep your data as owned by you. The data will still be yours. They will not be sharing it with other parties. If you own the data, you keep it yours, and you don't share it with anybody else, you're completely fine to track what users are doing in your app to make the app better, and you don't need any scary models for that. So to sum up, the 3 rules of tracking coming from me will be: first, don't track; second, if you do track, you should make sure to own the data of your users; and the rule number 3 is, if you can't own your data, make sure you abide by all the Apple's rules, and make sure your app is fully functional for all your users. So that's about it in this video. Let me know if you like it. I know it's a bit rough, but that's what I have time for. Found it useful? Make sure you let us know, and we'll try to keep them coming. See you.